think if business is rational, you're probably playing it safe, right? Like, I think if you're thinking about disruption, innovation, creating institutional change to whatever customer base you're trying to bring that change to, like, you have to be irrational, right?
Welcome to Vita Brevis, a podcast about business, art, life, and death. I'm your host, Carlos Cardenas. Here we explore how business, creativity, and philanthropy intersect through the lives of remarkable people. I talk with entrepreneurs and community leaders who are passionate collectors and visionary patrons to discover how art shapes their work, purpose, and legacy. Because life is short, but art is forever. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is our very first episode of Vita Brevis ever, so I am nervous and excited, but I'm here with my good friend Joey Hovsepyan. How are you doing, Joey?
Amazing, Carlos. Stoked to do this, man.
All right, yeah, this is cool. Like I said, excited and nervous. So Vita Brevis, I remind everyone, hopefully some wise words here that life is short, but art is forever. So this is a podcast about business, art, and dare I say, life and death. So, Joey, I want to kick off with something, and maybe this is a good way to kick off the podcast in general. What are your thoughts on the premise of the show? When I first invited you to come on, and I mentioned to you what this was all going to be about, what are the sort of things that went through your mind?
So I think it's really cool because when you think about like journalism, blogs, vlogs, any format of content being created in the business world and then also in the art
Hmm.
world, they have their own separate silos, but they never really crisscross.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, all of the market participants are dependent on the other silo. So like without the business world, there really is no art world because somebody needs to be buying paintings and supporting artists and supporting museums and philanthropy and that sort of thing. So I think merging those two worlds from a content perspective is great, right? Like when you approach me, I think my first thought was like, oh, this would be something I personally would want to listen to. So it's cool to partake in it. But I think in terms of interest, anybody who's an entrepreneur and into art, this is kind of like an uncharted territory per se. So I think it's super exciting. And I think the premise is really fascinating. I'm really stoked to see who else is on and how we all kind of, I'm sure I'll listen to future podcasts and pull ideas from things other people have said on the show in the same way I pull things in from paintings I see in walls at museums or at home or whatever the setting is.
Yeah, excellent. The idea initially was there's plenty of podcasts on entrepreneurship and business, finance, etc. There's tons of podcasts on art, interviews with artists, with dealers, with, journalists, critics, curators, etc. Um, there's even some podcasts on the business side of art, but I haven't found anything that was really sort of bridging between the sort of support structure and economic structure that comes from the sort of, collecting side of the table here, and blending that with their passions and how they got involved. So yeah, hopefully we're filling a gap here, and we'll see how this goes. So maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get here?
Definitely. So why don't we just start at day one? I'm actually born in Montreal, and I say let's start at day one because Montreal is obviously a very artistic city, a lot of historical
Mhm.
museums and the Museum of Fine Art and all that stuff. And I think it's interesting, like growing up in cities. I always, when people go, "Hey, how'd you get into art?" I think it's just because I've always lived in cities where you're surrounded by art. So like I was
Mhm.
born in Montreal, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, 20 minutes outside of the city, spent about a decade in LA living on top of Mocha for a few years in a building there, and then always downtown by the artist studios and all that sort of thing. And then we ended up in Austin after COVID. So um, always lived like in the middle of a city, always enjoyed living in cultural hubs. And then obviously I started my business in 2023 in the steel distribution space. And it's kind of
Mhm.
funny, I think, like when, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, but it's funny when you talk about like interests in art, there's almost like a direct correlation where like I'm in the steel world. We sell steel to manufacturers who build tangible things or innovative in how they produce a finished product. And then my interests in art have almost like directly correlated to works that are process driven or artists who are pushing the boundaries of like
Mhm.
what is art, how the physical painting or sculpture or whatever, like what's the actual process to build what you're making. The two have almost totally blended with one another, which has been kind of an interesting thing to see, and almost like a thesis in the collection over time that's kind of formulated.
Interesting. We'll definitely hear more about that. So tell us a little bit more about your business. From what I understand, it is a marketplace for metal tubing, if I'm not mistaken.
Sort of. So actually, we're not a marketplace. We're actually doing steel distribution as a whole. So like marketplaces are typically connecting a buyer to the seller, whereas we
Mhm,
are the seller. So we inventory raw materials. So carbon and stainless, bar, tube, and pipe is kind of where we focus, and we aim to service manufacturers like the big OEMs, your Bobcats, your Caterpillars, basically guys who have like multi-location manufacturing, huge 100,000 to million square foot factories, anything of that sort. So our thesis and the problem we're trying to solve is that like the steel industry is almost operating in like the 1900s, literally and metaphorically. The way that manufacturers have procured their steel really hasn't changed in decades. You need steel, you call up your distributor, usually tied to the city you're in. You go, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. You'll get a quote maybe the next day. And it's just this hyper analog environment. Meanwhile, the
mhm,
crazy thing is when you think about who our customers are, they're building mission critical equipment. You and I can go buy a toothbrush off of Amazon and we'll know exactly when something's going to get to our door. GM Defense is building mission critical equipment for like, I don't know, the army, and they have no idea when their material is going to get there. Well, that's
right,
an issue. We need to solve that issue. So we built the platform and the technology where manufacturers can come to us to buy their steel from our platform through our technology. But also, if we're creating an automated supply chain for a lot of these larger manufacturers, we're connecting directly into ERP systems, and we're basically looking to automate the supply chain for larger manufacturers. Which, if you look at manufacturing from a 35,000-foot view, well, automation is the future. So you might as well start automating the origin point of the manufacturing process, which is raw material getting in the door to then put it into the CNC
right.
machines or whatever it is to help manufacture the end product that then eventually might end up being a car or a table or a railroad, whatever it is made out of steel. We want to be the one to supply you with your raw materials.
And were you in this space before founding Emmett? And is that like where you saw the problems and the sort of holes that you could start to fill?
Yeah, definitely. So I started in the steel industry about a decade ago now. Pure accident. I had no idea what the steel industry was. I had no idea. Like, obviously, we know what metal are, right? Like, you go to somewhere and you go, "Hey, who owns something made of metal?" And everyone's hand goes up because you have like cars and houses are have structures made out of metal and all that now. But I never really thought of it in like a real world, tangible perspective. Ended up in the industry by pure accident. I had a buddy who was working at a big steel distributor out in LA. Sounded really interesting. One day he was like, "Yeah, we just sold steel to SpaceX." And me, I'm like, "What?" I had no idea that was even an occupation. Didn't even know that industry existed. But it really stood out to me from day one. And I said, "Hey, if you hear of like a sales job, let me know. It'd be an interesting thing to go do." For a couple of years, I don't know. I was 26, 27 years old at the time. I had no idea what the hell I was going to do with my life. And so a couple of weeks later, I was working in the steel industry, and I very, very quickly fell in love with the industry for two main reasons. One, seeing the real world output was super fulfilling. You're driving on the highway and you see a trailer go by and you see the logo and you're like, oh, I might have sold that steel to that company. Like they're one of our customers. And then the second thing that really drew me in is like, oh my God, there's going to be so much opportunity in this space. There's no technology. I was working at a multi-billion-dollar a year revenue company and we had no real ERP system. How does that make
Mhm.
any sense, right? So I knew at some point there's going to be tons of opportunity. I knew early on that at some point I want to go do my own thing, start my own company, go try and scale something to become a massive behemoth of a company. And everything just kind of aligned. So spent the first 5, 6 years just working sales, running sales teams, territories, all that sort of thing. Eventually, I then moved over to another company, a big Berkshire Hathaway industrial subsidiary, and I got to start building some technology and basically kind of running corporate innovations for a bunch of our subsidiaries, and really got to learn just kind of like on the ground floor, like manufacturing processes, the technologies they're using, the pain points, where we can really bring like institutional change to how some of these large companies operate. And then in April of 2023, left my corporate world job, locked myself in a WeWork for a week and had no idea what the game plan was, but I knew like let's go spend a couple weeks in a WeWork. Let's go bring our years of notes and sales notes and call old customers of mine and really just dive in to kind of figure out what the problem was. And then we realized like, hey, we need to rebuild steel distribution from the ground up. That how manufacturers get their steel and operate their supply chain is a huge issue to their operation. So let's go solve for that issue. And then now we're like a couple years in and we're scaling and growing and basically trying to change the world, right? As every founder in the world likes to say over and over and over.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's really cool that you were able to sort of, get into an industry that needed the technological upgrade. I think that's a lot of entrepreneurs' sort of sweet spot is to find, an industry that's under leveraged by technology, that's still kind of antiquated.
I mean, especially at like a critical level, right? Like, how many more project management tools does the world really need, right? You have all these SaaS companies and all these companies kind of building productive tools, and they're great tools. Like, I use tons of productivity tools every day, but like those don't create institutional change for like we as a country or we as like a generation of employees or whatever it is are going to
Mhm.
push the world forward, literally and metaphorically.
You were in Los Angeles when you got started in this space, and you mentioned living above Mocha. I don't know if you recall, I lived in LA years ago. I went to Cal Arts, and I was sort of part of the, LA community, and it's a wonderful artistic community. But tell me a little bit more about your time in Los Angeles and how that introduced you to the art world.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, right? I think when you look at not just LA, but any one of these big cities, your LAs, your New Yorks, your Londons, your Parises, there's so many art worlds, right? You have like the street art world, you have the contemporary art world, you have the mega collectors, you have the artists, you have grassroots organizations, right? So I think just being downtown LA and you're surrounded by all of the above, you're like there's really I find it hard to not get interested in some capacity, whether it be to the level of like starting to allocate a lot of your earnings to buying art versus appreciating it. Those are probably two different conversations. But I think just being in these environments was super inspiring. I think my art journey, I kind of treated my art journey in the same way that I've treated pretty much everything else in life, where it's like, okay, cool, this seems interesting. I'm definitely into it. Let's go start learning. Like I want to dive in. Like one of my philosophies in life is like how you do something is how you do everything. And so if I'm going to put my foot forward into an interest or a hobby or a sport, I usually end up getting all in on whatever new hobby or interest is. So with art, very quickly, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I really enjoy this. And I said, let me go start learning. So I spent the first couple of years just like going to galleries, going to visit artist studios. I used to reach out to like artists on Instagram and go, hey, love your paintings.
Mm.
Would love to come by, learn about your work, meet you, and just kind of see what you're up to. And I did that for 2 years. I probably visited every gallerist in LA, probably banged on 100 artist studios, and really just like became a sponge. Started to learn, started to figure out what my interests were. And then eventually, like as my career was growing, we started to have some dispensable capital where I can go start buying art. And I mean, it's as you know, it's a slippery slope. You buy one painting, and then it's two, and then it's 10, and then all of a sudden now we're putting artworks into storage units because we don't know where the hell we're going to put them, right? But it really becomes like a love of the game per se.
Well, I've heard that, that's actually the definition of a collector is when you have to start storing paintings beyond your walls, but you keep buying anyways.
Yeah, I mean, like when you see something beautiful and it sticks in your mind, and like when I say beautiful, I don't just mean literally. I mean, it might be like it might remind me of a nostalgic memory as I was a kid, or I might see something and it might inspire me in X, Y, and Z, or I might see something like it's such a wide net that gets cast where you're like, I need this object to be with me forever. Like there's paintings I've seen, and I'm like, this is going to enhance my life, like 100%. Like for instance, there's a painting by this amazing artist. His name is Scott Lawfer, great guy. He's become a good friend of mine, but his art is really, really drew me. And I'd seen this painting. I was like, what? Barely making any money out of my first job in the steel industry. And it was this painting of a bunch of dogs attacking a stag. And it's a stunning painting, but I was looking at this painting and I'm like, this is the type of painting that like a CEO should have in their background on a Zoom call because it's just like it's hyper aggressive. I'm kind of a hyper aggressive human being. It just seemed like something that I need to have in my life. So when I'm running a company, I can put it behind me in my office, right? And that painting really inspires me just to like push through and just like get shit done. It's just like that pain just builds energy in my life, right? So the problem is that happens to me way too much, and now we have way too much art. But I think like that feeling has never gone away. Every time I see a painting that elicits that feeling, like you just know that this thing needs to be a part of your life forever.
So when you're interested in works, do you think your sort of goal is to be challenged, or is it more about being soothed? Like what is the sort of function there? And of course, it could be, not so simple.
So I think it's both, right? I think there's definitely an element of like you see a beautiful abstract painting and you like stand in front of it and it's like 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and you're just staring at it and you're like, oh, you just feel there's like a calmness to it. All of a sudden, you just
Mhm.
feel like who needs antidepressants when you can stand in front of a painting that gives you that same feeling, right? So I think there's definitely an element of soothness. I think when I think about art at home, especially, like yeah, it's great. I come home every day and there's beautiful things in my house that like bring me some sort of joy. I think on the flip side too, though, I think there's an element where like art should challenge you, whether it be politically, whether it be personally, whether it just be like you're staring at a Glenn Brown painting and you're like, what is this grotesque painting I'm looking at? But like, what does it make you think of? What does it make you, like, what are the feelings it brings? Like, I think there's an interesting element to art challenging people. I think one of the things we have a lot of fun with is the art we put in our guest room at home. I think that's where I usually like to put challenging paintings, is when people come to our house and they're staying over for a few days and they have the guest room set up and that's supposed to be their home for a few days and there's a painting over their bed, and then the next morning they come to us for breakfast and they're like, I kept staring at that painting, like what the hell is it? I think that to me is like, cool, mission accomplished. I'm getting you to think outside the box. I'm bringing something new into your life and I'm challenging you to think about like, what am I looking at, or what is this? And like, it's creating a feeling, right? It's creating something it's going to cause new thoughts or new emotions or whatever whatever it is.
Is this kind of a daily vocation for you? I mean, are you reading blogs, and I imagine looking at Instagram posts pretty much every day? I'm trying to get an idea of like the sort of scale or the scope that art takes place in your daily life.
So I think early on, I was probably more involved at like that ground level where it was like just doom scrolling on Instagram for hours. Like I think like when you look at Instagram too, like early on, like the hashtag was a big one, right? You used to go like click a hashtag and then you can kind of go down rabbit holes and find new things. Really, I think that concept has kind of died out over time. But I think like between that, reading about art, I've kind of become like an art history nerd too, where they become like just mega collectors, how they got there over time, or art history from like a more literal definition of like the movements and kind of understanding like, hey, why is abstract expressionism so important, and like what were the different times? How did we go from paintings of people in the 1700s to like a Mark Ryden painting where it's just like a white box, right? So I think like learning the whys over time has been really fascinating to me. I think now, as we've gone deeper and deeper, I think we've become a little more pointed with where I expand my energy. A, because now I know what my tastes are a little better than I did a decade ago. And while taste is still evolving and advancing, I think we kind of have a baseline understanding of what I kind of gravitate towards. Like even when we go to a big art fair, like I usually know which booths I'm going to want to go to first, just because I know their program largely aligns with what I am interested in. So I think as time has gone on, we've been able to get a little more pointed and directed with how we go about it. But I think for me, the exciting one now has become more communicating with artists, learning directly from them. I think like one of my favorite things is like when you meet an artist and like, yeah, their art might be beautiful, but who is the artist as a person? What are their beliefs? What are their interests? Like, how did they get to the point where they became interested in the art they're producing? I think that's become really interesting to me lately, and one of the things I've been diving into more. And then now I think philanthropy has become a lot more interesting too, where it's like, okay, cool. We know all these artists, we know all these galleries. How do we start supporting museums? How do we start kind of supporting artist organizations? How do we start supporting grass level movements? I mean, we're both in Austin right now, and I think Austin is an amazing city to be in right now because there's so much energy in the art space. And like New York and LA, these are established markets, both from the collectors, the artists, and all that. But we're in a city where everything's being built from the ground up right now, and I think it's super exciting to now be able to contribute to that whole thing growing as a whole rather than just being a participant in a pre-existing ecosystem. So I think that's been kind of the more interesting aspect lately.
Yeah, well, in the ecosystem, there's different relationships. You have your relationship to the artist, sorry, to the artwork that you can see in an exhibition, for example, but it's a completely different situation when you're doing a studio visit and you're talking to the artist and you're seeing their process, and you're seeing things that don't make the cut, right? So it's a very different kind of relationship. And you can appreciate one and not the other. And, other relationships are between, other participants in the field. You could be talking to other collectors or talking to a critic. So it's a really dynamic ecosystem. It goes way beyond the object, and it goes into other different kind of social dynamics. So tell me something on the economic side. Maybe we could get back into the business a little bit here. Well, first of all, to what degree do these fields interact for you between your business and art?
So I think the overlap is more so in like the concept of innovation, right? And I think like in my field of work, like we're trying to innovate in an industry that's been hyper analog for a long time. And then a lot of the art I'm interested in has some sort of element of innovation too. Like how is the artwork getting made? Is an artist being innovative with their approach? Do they have like a monopoly on their practice? Are they trying something new? So I think those usually go hand in hand. And because of that, a lot of the art that'll go in my office or behind my, like I always will switch out my Zoom call, what's in the background, because then if I'm talking to people over and over, there's always like a new artwork being introduced to them, right? So I'm not like overly like, hey, everybody needs to go start buying art or anything like that. I don't really post too much of my collection on my Instagram, but I think people as they get to know me start realizing that art is a huge part of my life and probably plays a good bit of our business. Like I dream of the day where I have a massive multi-floor office and I can start putting art around the office and almost have like an emphasis of like, oh, what's going to be happening in each one of these rooms, and how do we use art to improve the quality of each one of those rooms to try and accomplish whatever it is, right? We have a conference room where we're maybe inviting our vendors to or whatever. Okay, maybe that's not the place to put challenging pieces of art, but maybe in our conference room where we're trying to go whiteboard, brainstorm, find new ideas, that might be a good place to put some challenging art. So I think that's where there's some overlap to the two. But I mean, if you talk to me enough, at some point, the art world will come up, and my interest in art will 100% start peeking its way into conversations.
There's something that I mentioned before we started chatting, and there's this an assumption that art is creative and that business is rational. But I think that we need to explore the possibility that maybe business is not as rational as we assume. You got to be very creative in the business world. Quantitative concerns can only get you so far.
Think if business is rational, you're probably playing it safe, right? Like I think if you're thinking about disruption, innovation, creating institutional change to whatever customer base you're trying to bring that change to, like you have to be irrational, right? Like when you think about and whenever I pitch investors, one of the things I'll usually say is something to the tune of like, forget about thinking outside of the box. Like we're pretending the box doesn't even exist. Because like otherwise, how are you going to come up with irrational concepts and ideas? If they were rational, they'd already be employed. I think if you look at probably like the rational versus irrational conversation, if you're an employee at a big corporation, you're probably in a more rational environment. You're a member of the accounting team. You guys have pretty straightforward responsibilities, whatever. But if you're an entrepreneur or a founder or anything of that sort, you're always operating in irrational. I mean, you're the whole premise of your existence as a founder is almost based in in an irrational goal, because otherwise somebody would have done it before.
I think that's really, really interesting. Hey, and so by extension, would that mean that maybe art has a function then? A rational function?
Yeah, 100%. I think, right? Like, especially like we said, if you're trying to challenge people, or if you're trying to soothe people, or if you're trying to create environments, like I think 100% art has a functional element to it.
How does it make you a better business person?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think like the inspiration aspect of it is always fascinating to me. I think when I think of like, oh, I need to go get some ideas, or oh, we ran into a wall, we need to go find a solution to figure it to get through this wall, or whatever it is. Like I've for sure stared at paintings before and had an idea pop up in my head, right? Like some people go, hey, I need to go for a swim, or oh, I need to go for a walk. My version might be, hey, I need to go to a gallery or a museum, or go walk the streets of New York City for a few hours and pop in and out of galleries and see if any ideas pop in my mind, right? Extracting kind of a creative lens on other people's interpretations or whatever it is being portrayed into their artwork and try and pull from that and then apply whatever the whatever the inspiration is into my day-to-day life or the solution I'm trying to create or the problem I'm trying to solve.
And so art, as we know, it can be very inexpensive. It can also be very expensive. And the more sort of institutionalized it becomes, the economics become more and more complicated. So economics and art are kind of inevitable. To what degree do you think about these things at all? I mean, I don't even want to mention the idea of art as an investment, but I would love to hear your sort of 2 cents on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's like I think part of the economic is more of like an economic boundary where like, okay, you could afford X, Y, and Z. You probably have to stay within that affordability. I think past that, the only real thing that ever pops in my mind is like, does it bring me the joy I'm looking for? Does it bring like, does it elicit, does it create that reaction, right? Like when I look at a piece of art that I bought for a couple $100, it should bring me the same joy or the same feeling as a piece of art that I might have spent 15, 20 grand on. I don't think there should really be like a joy attached to there's no correlation of joy attached to the value of the piece. If the piece goes up in value over time, cool, it's like a cherry on top. But I wouldn't say like the expectation is, hey, we want to build a collection that increases in value. It's like, no, I just want to build a collection that kind of tells other people about who I am as a human being, and probably even like milestones in life, or hey, you go buy a painting as a milestone gift, or you had a child or something, just things of that nature. I think the economic side of it, like, yeah, it's an asset. I think there's no doubting that art's an asset. Like we have to insure our artworks, and every year I have to go index and figure out the values and then give to the insurers to make sure that the collection's protected. But I wouldn't say we're ever like chasing an ROI on a piece or anything like that. But it's cool if it happens.
Generally speaking, when people sort of get into it with that kind of speculative strategy, they tend to kind of fall on their face.
Yeah, that's like another thing too, right? I think like especially when we have some of these boom cycles, you start getting a lot of people who aren't usually circling the art world, and they see a painting go for like they see arbitrage opportunities, and then they go try and buy out an artist studio or whatever it is. And like it never works. I'd be willing to bet money that like 95% of the time, everyone who's trying to make money on art ends up losing money on art. I think the people who are actually seeing like net worth gains on art are just everyday collectors who get that cherry on top, the painting they bought for 20 grand, that artist blows up, they get a MoMA show, and now they're $250,000. But like they weren't buying it because of that. They were just buying it because they like the tangible painting.
Yeah, the cycle is too long for you to sort of be calculated about it.
Yeah, but I do think though, like on the flip side though, I do think there's good art and there's bad art, right? And I think I think as you develop taste and you start engaging in the art world, you start to develop a feeling for what's good and what's bad, right? And I think that probably does play in like I like there's paintings I don't like that I can look at and go, oh, that's probably going to do really well over time because the actual painters are damn good artists. Like they are living in their own world. The paintings are amazing. They're skilled. They're talented. I might not like it, but you can very clearly see that this artist is going to go take off somewhere. Like they're so much better than everybody else in their cohort or their movement or whatever. They're the outlier within their group per se. I mean, what do you think?
What, on the economic side?
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, like, do you like what do you think about the concept that like not all art is good art, and that like over time you'll develop a taste where like you can kind of identify what's going to do good and what's going to do bad? Because I think like that is kind of where the like that is why the speculators don't usually do good, is because they don't actually understand art. They just see they see money signs, and hopefully they want it to go up or down, or they're making some speculative bets because maybe the artist is on like an artsy list or whatever, one of the culture lists or whatever it is, and they think, oh, that's going to be the next Picasso or whatever it is. Let me go allocate a bunch of capital to that.
Well, I think it's next to impossible to say even what's good and what's bad art. And I think you can talk about what speaks to you in whatever sort of narrative you're trying to articulate. Maybe a piece has a spot in that. But the thing is, the world changes and we change as people all the time. So you might find something really interesting today, and then 5 years down the road, it's not so interesting or it's too simple or something like that. And the contrary can happen as well, where something, is maybe a mystery to you today, which by the way, I think is a good thing. My feeling is that if something is a little bit too clever and too direct in its narrative, then you can kind of get it, air quotes. And then the experience is kind of dead. Looking at art, I think, is very different from, say, reading a book or watching a movie, where there's a clear narrative and, there's this idea of, do you get it? There's something to get. And I think that's a pretty rare thing in arts.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing too is like I'm sure if you talked to collectors, like a big group, let's say you take 100 collectors and you go, hey, do you have more artworks that you collected earlier on that you're now sick of versus artworks that you didn't really get gravitate towards at the beginning that now you do gravitate towards? I think you'd get more of the latter than the former. I think a lot of people who collect over time there's some areas or some movements or whatever, or some types of art that they're kind of like iffy about at first, and then as they start seeing it, they start developing, they start gaining some interest, they go in, right? Because even like art I've bought really early on that might not resonate with the theme of the collection or just me as a human being anymore, I still am happy I own it because it reminds me of that point in time when I did buy it, right? Whereas I think it's cool. Like I am the first person to say I was wrong. Like there's artists who I now collect who I didn't like at all at the beginning, but I was still interested. Like it was like the curiosity in me was like, okay, I don't get it, but maybe let's go learn, let's go understand it. And I think that's the beauty of like talking to artists and talking to curators and really learning, because a lot of the things that you might not like at the beginning, you might end up liking. I think even if you correlate it to food, right? The way one item of food is cooked, you might not like, but then the other format it's cooked in, you might love, right? So I think art has a lot of similarities where the format or how you interpret it or digest it can make a big difference as well. Like there's paintings I'll see in a gallery, and I actually don't think they look good in a gallery, but then you put it in your home and you're like, oh, this is amazing, right? It's just not the right space for an art to be shown, which is kind of ironic because art is made to be shown in galleries before it ends up in your home, right?
That's another interesting question. Where's it meant to be housed? Is it something to be in storage? Is it just something in your mind that you think about? The white walled gallery space is very, very specific, to a kind of institutional context, not something domestic at all.
Even when you look at like an artist, like a whole body of work, sometimes I'll see a show and I'm like, oh, it's such a bummer that these paintings aren't going to live with one another forever because the body of work as a whole has like a unified feel to it. Which is always something interesting. I think it's always great if you can buy two, three. Like I would love to be in a position to go to a show and go, oh, I want to buy all four of those because all four of those should stay together for the history of time.
And there are some lucky folks that get to do that, of course. But as far as like the sort of quality of work, who's to say what's good and what's bad? This is, I think something could be good or bad for me today, but that could change tomorrow. And whatever speaks to me today might not speak to you. What we're saying here is that art is subjective. There is something to be said about. Oh, I don't want to use the word consensus because it makes it sound like you're sort of following a leader or something like that. But there is this idea where there's a broader context or broader conversation that enlightens the conversation around the object. So there is something to be said about consensus and sort of art historical consensus. And not to say that all the critics are right, but it's complicated the way that these narratives are weaved. Even Warhol in the 80s, he was considered kind of a joke. Even Basquiat, in the early 90s, recently after he passed away, these things change all the time. It's interesting, I'm not a big Banksy fan. I could be wrong. Or maybe there's something that's gonna switch in my mind a few years down the road. Who
Yeah,
knows?
but I think that's why you just buy what you love and you collect what you love, because to you it's what matters, right? I think, and then if you get the consensus, then great, it's cool. But like, I think a collection is more about you as the human being as a collector than it is like what everybody else thinks, right? Like if I was buying art for because everybody else likes it, then what does that say about me, right? Is it just it seems like I'm just a sheep following the herd at that point, and I don't want to be a sheep.
And you do see a lot of that, unfortunately, in certain circles. They're the same artists and the same kind of collections. They could almost be interchangeable. But you said something interesting earlier that I think is absolutely true, is that your collection should kind of be a reflection of who you are. I remember in the past, like I've curated shows and friends would come up to me and say, yeah, this show looks like you. I thought that was interesting. And hopefully that changes over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think look at gallery programs, right? I think like there's certain gallery programs who like probably 70% of the artists they show, I usually end up liking because the gallery is such a reflection of the gallerists. So usually, like if I like Amy Adams, Adams and Ullman, I think I don't know how many works we've bought from her, but I would say 80% of the shows she puts on, we end up liking because we have we see eye to eye on like her program reflects our interests, right? There's the same with Tanya Layton. Anything she puts, or anything she puts on, we're gonna like because we kind of see eye to eye on our interests and what kind of pushes us in that direction of saying, wow, this is really interesting, it's inspiring, or whatever the outcome is. Whereas there's other galleries where like there's certain big galleries that I won't name because we're like I don't want to put anybody down. I like being a nice human being, but like I just don't like the program. They might be very big famous programs, and I just like it goes in one ear and out the other because I as a human being am just not interested in that type of art or whatever the thesis of that specific program is. It doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. That's just my personal take on their gallery program and whatever, right? I think art is subjective. I think some people love portraits of human beings, and I'm not a big portraits guy, which is totally fine. I can appreciate a good portrait. I just don't want to have a house lined with a bunch of paintings of somebody else. I enjoy conceptual artwork and some abstract stuff and the process-driven works and things like that. Where like some people walk into our house and go like, what is that? How is that a piece of art, right? It's not a painting of a person. How is that a piece of art?
That's always interesting when people come into the house, there's all it grabs people's attention. It's always interesting. Conversation starters, we called them, right?
Yeah, and I think anytime a non-collector walks into a collector's house, they walk out of the house, they go in the car, and they go, maybe we should go buy some art because it makes like I think it for sure gets the brain turning a little bit. And I think anytime somebody leaves, people, I mean, we work at a capital factory in downtown Austin. I've kind of become known as like the art guy. Anytime there's like a new startup or somehow art gets brought up, they go talk to Joey, and then all like kind of if they want to go check out some galleries or they're starting to get interested in art, like people catch the bug very, very quick, which is why I think we need like more institutions and more open collections and more people doing what you're doing, talking about art, kind of bringing more people into the ecosystem, right? I think art, like historically, has not been the most welcoming ecosystem, and I think that's probably the art world's fault. But I think like what you're
Mm.
doing and what a lot of the gallerists here in Austin are doing are creating these big environments where it's becoming more welcoming, which then the derivative of that is hopefully more people start collecting, more people start getting inspired, more homes are looking beautiful, and more people are less stressed because of the art on their walls and kind of things of that sort.
Doing the Lord's work, right? Um, you're a new father. Congratulations, Joy.
Thank you.
Any idea on how you're gonna be raising your child around artworks?
So it's funny, right? Like we already have started looking at artworks in the collection and going like, hey, should we put that in Georgie's room? Like we've had these conversations. Paige and I've had these conversations about like if we put this painting on the room, how will that inspire our daughter in some capacity, right? Because I mean, even I think kids are the best judges of artwork. Like, it's really fascinating when you go to a gallery and you see like an older kid, like a kid who's like 5 to 10 years old, walking around with their parents around a gallery and what they gravitate towards. That's one of my favorite things to see out in the real world because it's just crazy, right? Imagine if every human being had the same reaction to artworks as little kids have to artworks when they're out in the public. How many times do you see a kid stop in a city and like point at something, whether it be a building or a sculpture, whatever it is? That level of observation is so much more advanced relative to you and I as adults because we become kind of like, I don't want to say we're numb to environments, but it's just like to us, a city is just a city. We don't analyze every little thing of a city like a kid analyzes everything to them because everything to them is new. So I think we've kind of taken a lot of those concepts and put some thought into like what we hang on the floor where our daughter's room is and kind of the hallway leading up to it and that sort of thing. Where like, how does this enrich her life as a whole, and how do we kind of create a kid who's going to be a little more cultured and a little more understanding, a little more open-minded? Where like art kind of helps become that tool to create that environment.
That's super exciting. Congratulations again. No, I've raised 2 daughters around artwork, and, it was always interesting. We never had anything broken or damaged. It's kind of interesting how children kind of pick up on, the idea of respecting certain objects. Uh, Pets, it's a little bit more complicated.
We have a couple paintings that I'm like, when she starts walking, I'm like a little scared. Like they're like either like they're tall paintings, so the bottom half is like really low to the ground, or something like that, where I'm like, oh my god. Have you seen that those the great artist Ashley Bickerton had posted a photo on Instagram, and
Oh,
his
yeah.
daughter had like drawn on a Damien Hirst, and I'm like, part of me is like, that is the coolest thing in the world.
I
Then
saw
part
that.
of
I
me is
saw
like,
that.
oh
It
my
was
god, like
amazing.
that's like
Yeah.
a crazy expensive painting that your kid just went and scribbled on, right? So that there is like an element of fear, but I also think it's like an element of excitement. But like, I'd be lying if I said there's a few things in the house that probably might get moved once she's walking around and all
Yeah,
that.
that's just responsible parenting. Well, that's
Yeah.
interesting. No, I'm really glad that you mentioned the sort of environment that you wanna, raise her around and, a sort of thoughtful environment of, beauty and contemplation and curiosity and all of the things that you had mentioned. Would you like to leave a sort of cultural footprint for her or for the world at large? Do you ever think about, the idea of legacy regarding your activities in art?
Yeah, for sure. I think when when you talked what we talked about earlier in this conversation about like art becoming consensus, right? Like I think there's a cool element of like we've been collecting all this work over time, and then some of these artists are now like institutionally supported artists. Cool, let's go donate those pieces, right? Like even now I would love to be in a financial position where I can go help support museums with acquisitions and things like that. Not for the legacy part of it, but just because like I think like me just playing my part in helping art kind of reach the masses, more so for that reason than like the literal legacy part of things too. I think the legacy part of it for me is more so like, oh, Joey loved art and he did X, Y, and Z to help artists, right? Like even now, whenever there's like a young artist working out of an MFA studio and they're trying to raise some money for, I'm always like the first one to be like, hey, let's try and move some of these artworks so you can get some funding in or whatever. I think that element of it is something I can do right now where I'm being supportive as much as
Mm.
I can or trying to get involved with some of the museums to help with fundraising and things like that. And I think hopefully as I grow and my economic situation grows, we can just scale that support infrastructure that we're building now just at a bigger scale, right? I think it's really cool to like I think museums are important. I think museums need more support. I think like you look at LA and New York and like the Londons and the Parises where there's tons of economic support to museums. Then you look at the smaller markets like Austin and Salt Lake City and other like up and coming cities that hopefully one day will become tier one cities. I think the citizens of those cities need to partake in the art creation of the art infrastructure, right? So I think that right now for me is kind of the focus per se on the legacy side, where like 20 years from now, hopefully we can look back and I've played my part, and people go, yeah, Joey helped the art scene in Austin become what it is today, in these conversations of art history and things like that.
What do you hope for the next generation of collectors? What do you think they should be learning, or what should they try to avoid? What's your advice for people who are interested in, getting more involved?
So I think go learn. I think like go visit artists. Like look in today's day and age of social media. Like you can go on Instagram and hit up any artist and say, "Hey, I'd love to come see your studio. I love your artwork." Chances are they're going to be really excited because they do this for a living. They want people to see their artwork, right? Like the amount of access we have to like in terms of access, the amount of access we have to communication to artists we love, it's never been like this. Like imagine trying to if you were living in LA and you want to go visit a studio in New York City, the amount of coordinating you would have to do. Whereas now I can go reach out to a few artists, go, hey, I'm going to be in New York next week. I'd love to come by. And they go, perfect, come on over, right? So I think go learn, take advantage of the ease of communicating with artists. Go learn, go visit galleries, like go take it all in. I think like getting into collecting, if you don't know what you are doing, not from like an economic perspective, but from like an interest perspective, I think that's when you end up in the situation where 5 years down the line, everything you bought in the first 2 years you absolutely hate because you've now developed your taste, right? So I think go develop your taste, go learn, go talk to people, go figure it out, go to art fairs, go do the art fair circuits, go visit, um, learn, go even take some art history classes at like a local junior college or whatever, right? Like go take a couple humanities classes, go talk to curators at museums, right? I think go learn. Because I think if you look at anything we do, right, whether it be like just me in my workplace, to go do something properly, I have to go learn before I go try and do it. Yeah, sure, there's an art to being naive, but you also have to go learn the skills involved to go do something. So go put a lot of effort into that. So I think that's important. Um, Avoid the noise. I think these this is like the downside of the social media note is I think we've kind of created these hype cycles now where like for 2 years there'll be a really hot artist and everybody's flocking to their work, and then all of a sudden people just realize like, oh, this actually isn't all that interesting, and then for some reason like the market falls out from underneath them. It's like, yeah, the market fell out because it's like a young artist who hasn't actually even developed their practice. Like that's not totally shocking, right? And then people like if you're chasing economics, you're probably going to lose, ties in directly into that. So I think it just treat art like you treat everything else in life. Like when you're playing a sport growing up, you practice before you go to the game. Go do the same thing. Go learn, go practice, go figure out what you're into, go learn.
That's wonderful advice, and I think it's an excellent place to stop for us. Thank
Amazing.
you, Joey.
This has been fun.
This was, yeah, this was super cool.